Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Jumpstarting Talent Analytics. My name is Claire Alloway, and I'm a part of the marketing team here at Jobvite. And before we get started and hear from Kyle and Robert, I wanted to handle a couple of administrative details. So first off, you'll notice all your lines are muted. That's just to avoid background noise, but we would absolutely love your comments and questions for both of our presenters. We'll have a Q&A section at the end of the presentation, so feel free to use that chat box in the lower left-hand corner to type those in. And you can type them in throughout the presentation. I'll make sure to get to them in that Q&A. The second thing to cover is, yes, you will be getting the slides, and yes, you will be getting the recording. So you don't need to take furious notes. Just sit back and get excited about some talent analytics. With that, I'm going to pass it over to Kyle, who's going to give us a little background on himself and IDC.
Thanks, Claire, and thanks, guys, for joining today. My name is Kyle Lagunas, and I'm a research manager here at IDC, International Data Corporation. I am dedicated to covering emerging trends and technologies in talent acquisition. For today's presentation, we're going to be talking about talent analytics, specifically focused on 4 key tenets for success. The presentation will involve quite a bit of research that I've done in my work here at IDC, but I do want to make sure to call out at the beginning of the presentation that I am not touting myself as a recruiting expert. I have not recruited before. Instead, what I'm going to call out is just what I see as opportunities for talent acquisition professionals and organizations to evolve. And I think that analytics is the ticket to take us to the next level. A little bit about IDC, the company I work for. We are a global provider of market intelligence, advisory services, and also events. We're focused a lot on IT and consumer technology markets. My program, Emerging Trends in Talent Acquisition, is the only one of its kind that's dedicated to talent acquisition among the big 3. I'm pretty proud of the program we've got here, and I'm excited to share some of the research we've been doing. But of course, I'm not presenting by myself today. I'm joined by Robert from Jobvite. Robert, you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Kyle. Absolutely. So, hi everyone. My name is Robert Tsao. I am the new Chief Product Officer at Jobvite. I took the role over a couple of months ago, but I've actually been with Jobvite for the last 4 years. Previously was the VP of Strategic Operations, so I worked heavily with our CEO across all of our strategic projects and setting our strategy for the long term. Just a little bit more about me. I've spent the last 20 years working in the software and internet industry in Silicon Valley. I've been a founder of a couple of startups, CEO of one of them. I've been an investment banker and a venture capitalist as well. Prior to joining Jobvite, I was also responsible for corporate strategy at Taleo for a couple of years before they were acquired by Oracle. So I've been really deep looking in the recruiting space for the last 7 years, really working with the forward thinkers of recruiting organizations, trying to find new ways of using technology to improve how they run their businesses. So I'm really excited to be here today. I'd love to tell you a little bit about Jobvite. I'll take one slide and kind of give you an overview of what we're doing here. We'll go back to that slide. There we go. So we're focused solely on providing solutions for the recruiting funnel. And so we don't do talent management. We don't do HRIS. We've been focused solely on recruiting and talent acquisition for the last 10 years. And so as your recruiting process expands to include multiple sourcing and pipelining and branding and assessment and screening tools, we want to be that single recruiting platform that ties all of your vendors and process and data together so that you can provide a consistent user experience for your candidates and hiring managers and definitely for the recruiters. And we're also, per this webinar, very focused on the analytics aspect of that. So that enables us to tie all of that data from your sourcing partners and third-party vendors and analytics across all your processes into one place so you can get the best view and visibility of what's going on with your business and make smarter decisions. So really excited about getting into the details of how we can help and what our customers are doing with the analytics and data that we've got on our system. I'll turn that back over to you now, Cal.
Yeah, Robert, and what I love about your introduction and just some of the explanation of what Jobvite has been up to is it just underlines the point of that talent acquisition itself is evolving at breakneck pace. And the scope of this function is rapidly evolving to where now talent acquisition teams are expected to accomplish quite a bit with no real additional resources. There are a few macro trends that I think are driving quite a bit of change in the world that we're recruiting in, and that's making our jobs more complex and more difficult. Social media, social technologies, social collaboration, all of these things are changing candidate expectations around transparency through process. Websites like Glassdoor have come into prominence very quickly in recent years, and that's because candidates have wanted more information, more insight into employers, and the social web is proving to be a very rich resource for providing that information. Doesn't always make our jobs easier, quite a bit to the contrary. And then with mobile technologies, it's changed a lot of candidate behavior. Not just in always having access to the web through our smart devices, but in the lifestyles that we live, in the way that we think about our careers. I talk about talent today being always on the go, but then always looking ahead at what's next, and that what's next could be in the next 6 months, could be in the next 5 years. But candidates today are very actively managing their own careers, and so they have some more pointed questions for recruiting functions than they had in the past. And that's because in our lives as consumers, as customers, experience has become a pretty critical success factor for businesses, and we expect that experience to be top-notch when we are working with prospective employers as well. Candidate experience is coming to prominence as one of the leading drivers of high-performing talent acquisition, as it very well should. But then also, in a much larger context, organizations are globalizing operations. They're expanding operations into new regions. They're centralizing recruiting functions. They're looking to talent acquisition to support global growth. And so that's leading us to take into account global economic factors and source from a global talent pool. Again, this is just expanding the function beyond some of the standard post and pray recruiting we've managed for years. And this is posing significant challenges for the enterprise talent acquisition function. And then also something that I think is really interesting is e-commerce and the prominence of this instant gratification that we as consumers have in our daily lives. I love Amazon Now, Amazon Prime. If I realize in the morning that I've run out of dog food and I've got to be at the office all day, I could go on to Amazon Now, order a bag of dog food, and it's there when I get back from the office. And these are kinds of changing our expectations, again, around the services and the experience that we have with employers, but then also the technologies that we're using to submit applications and search for jobs. We're wanting some more of that consumer-grade user experience. And all of these things are only intensifying the workload and creating a more complex function, but it's also generating countless data points that we can either use or let fall flat. And I think that as we think about the future of talent acquisition and the imperative for us to evolve beyond that reactionary recruiting process, data and better measurement practices and analytics in particular will help us get there, to get where we need to be so we can evolve beyond a cost center and into a business driver. And that's really the maturity arc that I'm seeing, this evolution that talent acquisition is going through in the days since the recession. Whereas traditionally recruiting as part of an HR function has very much been a cost center where resources come in and hopefully some tangible, maybe even anecdotal benefits are being realized. In the past, our measures of success for recruiting have been focused on efficiency. We're looking at, you guessed them, time to fill and cost per hire, and these are the two metrics that we are most frequently reporting on. But now we're realizing there is way more to talent acquisition than just efficiency, like novel concept, right? We're talking about people, process, and efficiency is only one part of success here. Now we're trying to consider effectiveness. Okay, so maybe this robust candidate assessment and screening process that we have in place is giving us lots and lots of information around the viability of a candidate, but it's impacting time to hire, it's impacting candidate experience. Maybe we should look at something that might be a little bit more effective and still giving us the data we need to make a good hiring decision, but narrowing down, slimming down on process time there. We're trying to look at things from a value perspective rather than just a cost perspective. And that's because ultimately what we're trying to accomplish with recruiting practices these days is competitiveness, right? We talk about how difficult it is to compete for top talent. There's no exception for an organization big or small. This is a huge challenge. We are finding that those organizations that have the best candidate experience, have earned reputations as being employers of choice. These are the organizations that are consistently attracting higher quality candidates. They're consistently retaining quality candidates and top talent. And we're trying to get to that stage as well. As you can imagine, this is probably the top 10 or 15%. But what I found in my research is that those organizations that have reached that fully optimized, highly competitive recruiting function are doing so by leveraging talent analytics in order to optimize their recruiting efforts and embrace new modern initiatives. And this is important because talent acquisition is evolving so quickly that practitioners are having a lot of trouble navigating next practices. We talked about recruitment marketing. We talked about employer branding. We talked about programmatic ad buying. We talked about candidate relationship management. These are all things that are very, very new, that are turning the traditional reactionary recruiting model on its head, but it's also very difficult to navigate and to reach a point where of effectiveness and then competitiveness if we don't have the right measurement practices in place. So looking at attracting candidates, looking at engaging candidates and evaluating them through these more robust and strategic practices, what's working and what's not. The big challenge I find when I talk to recruiting leaders today is not that they're not bought into next practices, not that they don't think that employer brand, for example, is important. It's, Kyle, I don't know how to quantify the impact of a strong employer brand. Does that sound familiar? It's because we're taking shots in the dark, right? We're dabbling here. We get buy-in from the organization. Yes, okay, maybe we should be making some changes to our process to improve candidate experience. Maybe we should start gauging NPS for candidates. But any gain or loss there, it's kind of a big question mark as to what's driving that. And that's where better measurement practices and analytics capabilities can help you to kind of evolve those capabilities and iterate on our efforts to reach a point of competitiveness. Now, this is my soapbox period where I get to talk to you guys about the value of talent analytics. What I find is that folks have a hard time wrapping their heads around a definition, a practical definition for analytics. And so I've taken a crack at it here. I see it as very simply the measurement and analysis of talent data that's generated through your recruiting practices, whether it's through recruitment marketing or through candidate experience surveys, or whether it's through job boards and things like that. Taking that data and analyzing it, and then going a step further to apply data-based insights that you're gleaned from that data in order to optimize workforce viability, in order to optimize recruiting efforts. That's what data-driven HR is. That's what data-driven recruiting is. It's taking data and doing something with it, which is pretty simplistic at the highest level, but I'm sure you can imagine it gets pretty complex as you drill in. But I look at three core capabilities that are part of a valuable talent analytics function. The first is the most obvious, monitoring KPIs. I know that when you are managing 30 different requisitions and a team of 5 recruiters, and you're constantly going through this churn and burn recruiting environment, it is really difficult to look up and see the forest for the trees. It's difficult to keep tabs on your metrics and on your KPIs, and that's because you've got enough work to do in the day-to-day. But monitoring KPIs is what helps you over time to limit some of the time-wasting activities, to reduce the amount of demand on your bandwidth in order to, again, optimize your efforts, to optimize your time so that you're driving the most impact through your practices. You won't really know how things are improving if you don't actually have any process in place to monitor key performance indicators. And the reason why you want to monitor these things is, yes, I want to know how well we're doing, but I also want to keep tabs on what's coming. I want to make sure that I know what's just around the bend. If our business has strategic plans to grow X% in the next 18 months, I'm going to have a strong input on that business plan because my recruiting function is going to be a huge enabler of that plan. And so when I'm running pipeline reports, I'm going to be able to tell the business that we need to make a big investment in recruit marketing in retail in Topeka because that's where we're opening most of our new storefronts. And right now we only have 3 applicants per requisition. We've got to get something else going there. This is kind of giving you an idea of what you need to be doing instead of just constantly chasing that moving target. And then ultimately what we're trying to accomplish is reaching a point where we as talent leaders are providing insight to the business. No one else is more qualified to redefine the measures of success for your recruiting function, for your hire organization. But in order for us to evolve beyond cost per hire and time to fill, we're going to need to put our thinking hats on and provide insight to the business, but then also to our recruiters as well. So now stepping off my soapbox here, I pitched you guys on the value proposition here. Instead, I'm going to talk about the current state of analytics. As you might imagine, adoption is still relatively far behind innovation. So Robert, as he was introducing Jobvite, was talking a lot about these new and exciting capabilities that they've really focused on developing over the last couple of years. But in a survey I conducted of 498 organizations, 60% of which were 1,000 employees or larger, 51% of those organizations said they are tracking metrics and performance data and recruiting manually. And maybe this sounds familiar to you. You've got your one data guru on your team who owns a complex Excel file with pivot tables and spreadsheets, and she's constantly running reports, and she can tell you exactly what this looks like or give you data for that initiative, whatever. It's difficult, right? Especially when you're talking about a large organization. It starts to become impossible to actually scale measurement practices when it's done manually. But frighteningly as well, once that data guru leaves, what are you left with? You might have her toolkit, but no one knows how to use it. And so there's a big risk of losing insight and of having your analytics function, your measurement practices come to a screeching halt when a critical player leaves. But then we are seeing some organizations, 20% have partially integrated metrics and analytics, and some have fully integrated. I think that we will start to see this improve over time because most ATSs these days, I would say 90% of them are cloud-based, and cloud-based systems are easier to integrate with point solutions, and so it's easier to get an end-to-end view into recruiting performance. But in this same survey, I also asked organizations to tell me which recruiting capabilities were most critical to them as part of their modern recruiting strategy. And talent engagement, talent attraction ranked at the very top, with 74% saying talent engagement was either very or critically important, and 71% saying that talent attraction was either very or critically important. Now, at the same time, talent strategy, which includes strategic initiatives like diversity and inclusion and veteran hiring, university recruiting, things like this, this is also important. But what I want to really underline here is talent attraction and talent engagement. These are huge components of recruitment marketing operations. And this tells me that the future of recruiting is a recruitment marketing function. It is this attract and engage rather than a post and pray model. And the majority of hiring organizations, the majority of recruiting leaders are already trying to get to a point of proficiency in these areas. Now, when I ask them across then these three capabilities, talent attraction, talent engagement, and talent strategy, I asked them to what extent are they actually measuring performance in these different areas, which again are critically important to them. And what you'll note is that the highest response for all three in this, I'm very colorblind, so I think this is a grayish green, but 40% of talent attraction, 36% of talent engagement, 36% for talent strategy, they are tracking some metrics, but they're doing so infrequently and inconsistently. And then you see directly to the left of that light green, a darker green, 18% across the board are tracking data anecdotally or ad hoc. They might run just a quick report or do a quick analysis of something. And then you see this red line that goes across. These are folks that are not tracking anything at all. And the fact that that is not at the very bottom of the chart is a bit alarming to me, because these are areas where we are begging the business for resources. We're really asking the business to trust us and give us some buy-in so that we can invest in innovation and invest in transformation. And if we are not actually tracking any performance or tracking any return, we can't demonstrate to the business impact. So in that vein, I asked this follow-up question. Okay, so here we have the extent to which you're measuring. Based on your existing measurement practices, how would you rate the value of the insights you're able to generate for the business? And again, across these three functions, things don't look so good. 34% in talent attraction, 32% in talent engagement, and 30% in talent strategy say that they are generating some insights, but analysis and application is challenging. And again, if you look to the left in the darker green, these respondents are saying that they are able to generate some insights, but analysis and application is non-existent. Now, as a researcher, I don't believe that survey data should stand alone, that you should leave it as is, that it speaks for itself. And so part of my process is going back to my survey respondents and asking them to expand on their responses here. So I say, for those folks that are producing some insights but are struggling with analysis and application, what is actually going on? And come to find out, kind of what you would expect, if analysis and application is a challenge, recruiting leaders have other things that that take up their attention, and so analytics and insight kind of fall to the wayside. So what we find is in most cases, analysis and application of performance data in these areas is pretty much non-existent. And so if you add up those two responses, it's over half are either doing nothing or not very much with the performance data that they're gathering. And I think this is a huge blind spot. But I also think that this is a major missed opportunity to serve the business better and more strategically and really evolve that recruiting function, again, beyond cost center and into business driver. So I'm going to pause right there and just take a quick look at the time just so I can note where we are in the presentation. I want to make sure we leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. Looks like we're about 25 minutes in, so we can power on through. So, okay, I've preached a little bit. I've shared some data around the state of analytics and the opportunities to improve. And now it's time to talk about things that are a little bit more actionable, about moving the needle here, right? So here's my hypothesis. If talent acquisition is a business critical capability, and I firmly believe it is, then how can improved talent analytics actually drive better performance? That's what we're all trying to get at, right? Well, although any solution provider in the space is going to tout their solutions and their capabilities and try and sell you on it, I found that there is no silver bullet here. However, there are some key practices that I think will be helpful in getting that process started, starting to move the needle forward. And so I put together, a very loose, very high-level framework for getting started. These are our 4 key tenets for the presentation today. And we'll go into each of these in detail, but I'll just run through them first. The first is measuring what you can. One of the biggest obstacles in achieving improved analytics and evolving measures of success is the misconception that people have that talent analytics is an all or nothing proposition. You got to go all in or not at all. And that's simply not true. Because recruiting is getting more complicated, because the job is getting more difficult, I know that bandwidth is limited. And that's why I encourage folks to start by focusing on the measures that they can track with their existing technologies and with their existing bandwidth. From there, I think it's important to have a conversation around what matters most, measuring the metrics and KPIs that matter most. What matters most to the recruiting function, what matters most to the HR function, and what matters most to the business. And that requires us to have a bit of dialogue with disparate parts of the business that I think can actually be pretty helpful for us as we're going through this evolution, this journey. And then on the right of the framework are more like measurement practices. The first is measuring frequently and consistently. Again, I saw in the research that I did that a lot of the reporting, a lot of the analysis was done ad hoc or anecdotally. And with those kinds of practices, it's more like water cooler talk. It's like, hey, Robert, how are we doing in candidate experience? Robert emails me back. He says, we're doing pretty good. And then I say, okay, great. And that's the end of the performance conversation. We need to be consistently evaluating measures of success in talent acquisition, whatever they are, so that we can understand at the end of a quarter where things are wrong or where things are improving so that we can actually take action instead of just constantly react when something goes wrong. And then, of course, that leads to the final point here. Analyze, report, and optimize. Do something with this data. Look at it and familiarize yourself with it. Even if you are not, quote unquote, a data person, it will all be pig Latin to you until you get familiar with it, until you spend some time with your dashboards or digging into some of the reports maybe your job board provider will send you. But then also reporting this stuff, sharing it with the business in order to ultimately optimize your recruiting efforts. So let's drill into these each, and Robert is going to chime in here and talk to us a little bit about existing capabilities within Jobvite to support these things. Measure what you can. And this is probably the most practical advice that I can give you about improving things here. In order to evolve measurement practices beyond cost per hire analysis or new hire turnover report, I know that this can be daunting, especially if you're not a data analyst, especially if analytics is just not your thing. But that's why I encourage people to focus on metrics and information that you can track without too much change management, without too much heavy lifting, without too much additional investment. And that's because almost every single recruiting tool, almost every single HR tool today has its own reporting and analytics capabilities. Some of them are better than others, but everyone can provide you with some insight, with some information around what's working and what might need some review. So again, coming back to the survey of 500 recruiting organizations, I asked the question about some basic individual recruiting metrics. I asked, to what extent are you using these metrics to gauge individual recruiting performance? As you look across the bottom here, you can see that these things are not rocket science. Rec load, candidate satisfaction, hiring manager satisfaction, time to fill, submission to acceptance ratios, submission to hire ratios, time to source, and internal SLAs, which is kind of a catch-all here. These are not like pie in the sky, super aspirational metrics. These are things that a standard ATS can help you track. These are things that a simple survey tool can help you track. And as you look at this graph, the thing I want you to note is the red line across the top, because it's way up there. What it tells us is that for most of these metrics, candidate satisfaction, hiring manager satisfaction, submission to acceptance and hire, time to source, et cetera, are not being tracked at all. And the only place that this dips is in rec load, which I do think is a factor in evaluating individual recruiter performance, but then also dips, as you would expect, in time to fill. which is not an individual recruiter performance metric. This is something that is organizational, right? And so this tells us that, that maybe it's time to reconsider our performance measurement, our performance management practices for recruiters, because all of these things can help to inform how things are going for a recruiter, helps you understand your recruiting function, your recruiting operation from on an individual and team basis. You can start to improve on some of these things that are real drivers of talent acquisition performance.
Absolutely, Kyle. Thanks. And I'll just jump in here from a vendor perspective. I just have to concur with what you were talking about before, in that from the vendor side, we definitely see how challenging it is for the recruiters and the employers to actually aggregate data from multiple third-party vendors and actually think forward into how are they going to take that data and report on it, organize it, and put it in a format that drives insights. I will have to just come clean of when we're setting up our customers on an ATS, a lot of times reporting and analytics is not that number one priority, and they're not necessarily thinking about it. It's a lot of times it's about what is that process, what are the forms, and in that type of a thought process, you're not thinking forward enough to be able to say, okay, how do I standardize the workflow steps? How do I standardize the sources so that I can gather all of the data from multiple locations and organizations across different functions and different types of roles to gather the insights that I need? So it really starts off with day one. There is work to do just to gather the metrics when you're setting up your systems. And thinking forward, taking a little time to think through that when you're setting up your systems with a new vendor, or just revisiting your systems right now and thinking through what reports and what data you'd like to be able to gather is extremely important. With that said, I've put together some lists of just typical metrics that our customers actually do report on. From an ATS and a technology perspective, we track everything, right? So we can see every activity, every piece of data, every login. But then, as I said, organizing it and understanding how you want to view it is critical to being able to make sense of it. I'll give you some examples of kind of what people have been able to do and what we've done specifically in the product to surface some of that information in usable formats. This one is a sourcing dashboard that you can see that is built into the ATS. Again, this takes a little bit of work up front to categorize. Not every company will call the same sources the same things. Some companies will have different types of sources that drive more of the activity. And so in that setup, being able to identify what you want to track, how detailed of a level of source tracking do you want to have, will benefit you going forward, because going back into some of these things will just, if you don't have it set up the right way, you're not going to be able to see it in the format that makes the most sense for you. So, and if you do have it set up the right way, you can then drill down into getting business results. So as you saw before, we were able to help customers carve out where their applicants are coming from starting at the career site, being generated by referrals, using social networks or job boards or agencies. When you take a look, when you've broken them out consistently across and are tracking them, then you can come back in and take a look at the results and the productivity across all of these. So in this situation, just as and this is an anonymized report from one of our customers, but you can see that as probably is typical, job boards generate a whole lot of applications, but not necessarily the most hires. And what we've seen consistently is referrals are probably the most valuable source of applicants. In this situation, they generated 10 times as many hires as job boards. But you have to then drill down into what works, what doesn't, and how can you then focus on maximizing the returns from the referrals, and how are you going to drive applicants from the more high value add, more quality driven sources. Another example of a report that our customers like to use is what we call the bottleneck report. So this is we have multiple versions of how you get this data, but essentially it breaks out all of the stages in your recruiting process and shows the average number of days that candidates spend at each stage. So in that type of a process, you can quickly take a look at where people are hanging up, and drill down into that data of, are there things that are happening that are unique? Is this something in the process that maybe we can improve? You can go up and down the organization to take a look at how that funnel and that backlog looks by recruiter, by hiring manager, by role, by location, and really get much better insight into how you react and driving better insight into understanding your business.
Thanks, Robert. And I think that last point you made is pretty important here. We're not just talking about recruiting metrics. We're talking about business metrics. We're talking about evolving recruiting as a function that drives business performance, that impacts business performance. Like we know it does, right? We just need to be able to quantify that impact and then advise the business based on that data. And considering the business, bringing the business into conversation, well, one of our biggest stakeholder groups in the business is the hiring managers that we support. And so to that end, I asked this question in the survey, well, how are we actually measuring hiring manager satisfaction and performance? How well are we keeping tabs on our #1 client in the business? Inside of the business. And again, you see this line that goes across the top that shows that people are not evaluating anything when it comes to hiring managers. And there's a slight dip here at candidate quality, but then again, you see that light green bar that's up there. That's just the majority of anything done there is around anecdotal information. Like the recruiter asks Robert, hey, Robert, what did you think of the candidate that came in? Robert says, you know what, she wasn't bad. Maybe we should bring her back in for an interview with the whole team or something. And that's it. So we won't be able to, over time, we won't be able to improve the candidate quality that we are submitting to hiring managers because we don't really have any quantifiable information on what they like and what they don't. We're really just relying on, again, that water cooler talk, that casual conversation. And while conversation definitely needs to happen, we need to be gathering data around these things in order to improve over time. We're talking about this and measuring what you can. These are all things across the bottom. Business recruiting versus business consideration. How many candidates do recruiters think are a good fit versus the business's consideration of good fit? How can you close the gap there? Candidate satisfaction. How satisfied are candidates with the hiring manager, with their experience with the hiring manager? This is critically important to candidate experience and something that we definitely want to have accountability around, something that we want to stay on top of so that we're not fighting fires, but that we're improving candidate relationships and candidate experience over time. And then, like time to review and time to accept a candidate, like these are operational bottlenecks that we need to have insight into so that we're not just complaining about a lack of collaboration with the hiring manager, but we can actually share with the business, like these are average review times for candidates. This business unit over here is consistently taking twice as long to review candidates as any other part of the business. Well, suddenly you have executive leaders that are going to sit up and start paying closer attention to these things because you'll have data, not just anecdotal information, right?
Yeah, and speaking of working with hiring managers, the #1 thing that hiring managers want to see that we found is really just looking into that pipeline and that funnel, right? So this is an example of a candidate pipeline report. So this is something that, again, if properly set up within your systems, you have the right stages set up and they're consistent across all of the hiring pipelines and the different funnels and the different organizations, you can take a look at where people are and what is the percentage of candidates that go from stage to stage. And then you get an idea of what the typical pass-through rate is, and then you can start getting some planning capabilities. This is, when you match a report like this with what I showed you before on the bottleneck report, which shows you the typical time it takes within each stage, then you have an understanding of how many people, how much time it takes, how many people to get through each stage, and you can start to understand that by role, by location, by even hiring manager, because they have a very big role in that, right? So when you understand those types of metrics, then you can go into that planning phase and work yourself out, right? And working with that hiring manager, then you can set out what the proper SLAs and metrics should be for a particular role that's coming up later on the year based off of historical results. How many people do we have right now in the pipeline, and based off of that, do I think that we'll be able to hit that SLA for getting somebody in that seat? If not, where is it that we're lacking and what can we work on? You can even drill down into that hiring manager, as I said, and take a look at how that particular hiring manager compares against the rest of the organization. Sometimes we've seen that hiring manager is just slow at getting back. Maybe he's the bottleneck in that situation. Not necessarily calling anybody out, but then the recruiter can be prepared for that in setting up the right process and be proactive in making sure that you hit that SLA. So these are things that we've seen from our customer base and using the right metrics within the ATS.
And Robert, I'll just interject here. I noticed we've got 18 minutes and we have quite a few slides to cover, so I'm going to start to fast track some of these things. Folks, you will get a copy of the deck, so you'll be able to dig into some of the data a little more extensively. But again, the point here is to focus on when you're starting to embark on this talent analytics journey. Start by focusing on the metrics that you can actually track. One of the biggest blind spots for folks is around recruitment marketing performance. And again, I've asked this question about the extent to which we're measuring things here, and this red line is all the way at the top across the board. The one area where this dips down is in job posting performance. But these job posting providers, job aggregators, they're sending you reports themselves. So you can't really take credit for reporting that you're not pulling.
Absolutely. And for this one, I'll be quick as well. This is an example of a report that automatically generates that helps you track web campaigns. So really need some of these things. If you're going to do web campaigns and do some of the recruitment marketing, you really need to know how effective it is, what works, what doesn't, to be able to fine-tune your capabilities.
Absolutely. I mean, otherwise you're just taking shots in the dark and you will never get better. You might get lucky, and that's not enough to build a scalable operation. So once you've identified the metrics that you can measure without too much heavy lifting, it's time to start talking to the business about the measures that matter most. And I think that the most realistic approach here is to talk to the business, talk to your hiring managers, and talk to your recruiters about what they want to gain, what areas of recruiting performance they want to gain better insight into. Now, in the survey that I ran, those organizations that were able to consistently deliver strategic insights to the business with their existing measurement practices, these are some of the metrics that those leading organizations were focused on: quality of hire, culture fit, quality of candidate, recruiter performance, candidate experience, hiring manager satisfaction, new hire turnover, and offer acceptance rates. Now, these probably are not super surprising to you, but what's important to note is they're not just tracking quality of hire as a 1 to 5. They're quantifying these things. They're quantifying culture fit. So when a hiring manager wants to reject a candidate and just cites culture fit as a reason, they're not accepting just those two words in the rejection. They are actually requiring the hiring managers to offer more pointed feedback so they can actually vet the review, but then also just get feedback that you could act on, right? And then one of the things that was most important to these organizations was candidate experience. I asked in the survey how important candidate experience is when evaluating the strategic performance of talent acquisition, and 72% of organizations said that it's very or critically important. Now, as you'd imagine, the actual performance or the actual measurement practices around candidate experience are a little wishy-washy because folks aren't really sure what to do here. So what I did in just this quick exercise when I was building the deck for our presentation was I built, using Google Forms, a candidate experience survey. Candidate experience matters to the business, but what we find is it's difficult to quantify candidate experience. It's difficult to gain actionable insight. And so a very simple survey like this, I'm asking folks whether they would recommend us to a friend, or on a scale of 1 to 5, what was your experience with the recruiter? On a scale of 1 to 5, what was your experience with your hiring manager? On a scale of 1 to 5, what was your experience with our business as a whole? These are data points you can actually use to gauge your candidate experience, and also to evaluate your recruiting process and gain insight into areas that need improvement. And this is something that has really caught a lot of momentum to the point where an entire nonprofit is dedicated to benchmarking candidate experience. If anyone's not familiar, I encourage you to look at the Candidate Experience Awards that's ran by the Talent Board. They have a very robust survey that they have developed and offer up for free for you to use. Again, that's Talent Board Candidate Experience Awards. It's definitely worth taking a look at.
Absolutely. And to that theme, there is an immense importance to having that qualitative feedback. And I'll just give a quick shout out to a couple of our partners that also help in doing that as well. So Glassdoor and Better Company are partners of ours, and that's their business, right, in helping to galvanize and provide a platform for candidates to provide feedback on your recruiting experience. One of the things that we do actually to help provide data that reinforces that qualitative feedback is just measurement of certain metrics when it comes to candidate experience. For example, taking a look at click-through rates and apply completion rates, and definitely drilling into that bottleneck report helps you find data of where things are plugging up and also reinforces that qualitative feedback.
Now, we've talked about measuring what you can and measuring what matters most. And now it's time to talk about measurement practices themselves. And this is the one that I always lead with. It's focused on frequency and consistency. And that's because good analysis, good analytics rely on sound data. And that means you have to be tracking activities and outcomes more frequently and also more consistently. And I've got a little Dilbert comic here to kind of give you an example of what this means. So you need a dashboard application to track your key metrics. That way you'll have more data to ignore when you make your decisions based on company politics. Will the data be accurate? Okay, let's pretend that matters. The center slide here is what matters most about measuring frequently and consistently. Is you want to make sure that you have the data you need to make data-based decisions, to actually get beyond hiring with gut, to optimize your recruitment marketing efforts, to understand why, how engaged your talent pools are, or how viable your talent pipeline is. You need data around this, and not something that you are just pulling every quarter when your director is breathing down your neck, but on a weekly and monthly basis. So when you run that new recruitment marketing campaign and you see an impact in your talent pipeline, you could point back to that. You could say that we ran this campaign, we ran 3 targeted campaigns for women in tech and for diversity recruiting, and we ran this great campaign for millennials. And look at how this impact we had on our pipeline. The ability to spot those triggers and those drivers is what's going to help you to optimize your performance more regularly. Now, the challenge here is in frequency. So in the survey, I asked those leading organizations, again, those that were consistently delivering strategic insight to the business about their measurement practices. And then I also asked those laggard organizations that were either not generating any insights or that were struggling with analysis and application. Those organizations that are leading, 40% are tracking candidate experience frequently or in real time. 41% are tracking recruiter response time specifically, either frequently or in real time. And 51% are evaluating recruitment marketing performance frequently or in real time. On the other end, for those laggard organizations, 70% are not tracking candidate experience whatsoever, or they're relying wholly on anecdotal information, which is not valuable in and of itself. 79% are not tracking recruiter response time, or they're relying on anecdotal information, which is like, hey Kyle, how is your response time for candidates this week? And I say, not too bad, and that's the end of the conversation. You can't really optimize if I'm just self-reporting. And then again, for recruitment marketing, 61% of laggard organizations are either not tracking or relying wholly on anecdotal information. And this is not meant to be damning. It's meant to give you an idea of just how much opportunity there is to improve and stand out, really, both as employers of choice, but also as like kick-ass recruiting functions, as kick-ass recruiters. This is really about career improvement as well.
Absolutely, and that's why we believe that dashboarding is so important, right? Dashboarding is different than reporting. Dashboards is really what you set up and log in and see every day when you log into that system. So from our side, we definitely have a dashboard, and from that, it's typically what you'll see set up are the things that help you monitor and track your own tasks and deliverables. But on top of that, adding those key reports as widgets into the dashboard allow you to see those critical metrics of how are you performing in getting those tasks done. Is that, are you succeeding? Is it positive? Are you continuing to improve? Those things are critical in making sure that you're monitoring those metrics on a day-to-day basis. And really, the only place to do that is not with the reporting system. It's really with a dashboard that you can customize for each individual.
Absolutely. Just staying on top of things is a big part of this. And then also the biggest part is doing something with this data. Measurement for the sake of measurement is not enough. It's not valuable. What's valuable is the insights that you generate. And those insights need to be shared with the business so that you could put recruiting performance data into context and have a conversation around it. So again, I love Dilbert because I think it's just a perfect mockery of our line of work. In this one, his boss is asking, when will I get your project status report? And Dilbert responds, you're asking for a status report on the status of the status report? And his boss is like, right, when can I get that? Well, it's starting to look like infinity. The point here is that the business is interested in what's going on, and they want some data from you to demonstrate what's happening.
So just to reiterate on that, yes, context is key, right? So what do those metrics actually mean? Am I good? Am I bad? Should I make a change, or am I actually way above par? So critical to that is really getting some benchmarks and understanding where you stand with not only within the organization but the counterparts. So one of the things that Jobvite attempts to do is 3 times a year we have different reports that come out with different types of benchmarks. This is an example of our of a benchmark report that just came out, taking a look at a lot of the job seekers and their activity through the funnel. And again, from a time perspective, I won't go into the details. You can get these types of reports on our website, but it really goes through our 50,000 jobs posted last year, almost 70 million job seekers. So it gives you a broad range, and we've broken it out by industry and company size. So hopefully this gives you some insight, and you can use this against some of your own reports to kind of see where you fit in the grand scheme of things. And these are just examples of how we've broken them out. One thing that I think is important is what we talked about on the dashboarding side is putting benchmarks into your dashboard is also critical, giving you that kind of north star of where you're trying to go and how do I compare day to day with that is something that helps you align on a day-to-day basis so you're making individual decisions within each recruiting process. So that's also a key piece that we'll be adding into our own dashboard capability, but that's something that everybody should be looking at.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more there, Robert. And that's because, again, we're not just competing with ourselves, right? We're not just trying to improve our recruiting function just so we can say we've got a better recruiting function. We're competing for talent, and we need to make sure that our practices are competitive and that they're current and that we are able to meet candidate expectations and respond to shifts in talent and labor markets. And in order to do so, we need to understand and contextualize our performance data against our peers and against our talent competitors. But then we also need to share this stuff with the business. And so I'm going to leave you guys with this data point here. I asked in the same survey, how are they reporting on recruiting performance to the business? And you'll see 91% are reporting to C-level executives, which is fantastic. 73% are reporting within the talent functions, which is good. 64% are reporting to HR leadership, but only 23% here are reporting talent acquisition performance data to hiring managers. Only 23% of hiring managers have any insight whatsoever into what's going on in recruiting, which is bound to create quite a bit of friction and quite a bit of skepticism around the work that we're doing and the value that we bring. And that's just because they don't know any better. We expect them to just take our word for it, and I don't think that that's enough. I don't think that any other function in the business can make that, can ask that of the business, not if they want to keep their jobs. So this is something that was really jumped out at me. We need to report on data to the business so we can have conversations around improvement. We can have more conversations around investing in new capabilities. And we need to get business from our #1 stakeholders to do that. So from there, I'm going to kick back to Claire and see if we had any questions that came in through the presentation. I know we threw a lot at you guys today, but this is a topic that's pretty near and dear to my heart and also to the guys over at Jobvite. So please, we invite you to join the discussion with us today.
Great. Yeah, thank you very much, Kyle, and thank you very much, Robert. So we do have a couple of questions coming in. I know we are close to the top of the hour, so we'll try and get as many of them answered as possible, but we'll also send out a follow-up with the recording, the presentation, and maybe some of the answers that I know we've covered in the past with Robert and Kyle in the prep for this. So first off, we have a question from Linda. Other than surveys, how do you suggest measuring candidate experience? Kyle, do you have any?
Robert, if you don't mind, I can take that. I do. Yeah, I'm a researcher, and surveys are a big source of data for me in the work that I do. But I have to contextualize this data. With candidate experience and the social web, there are quite a few other areas that you can go to gather additional information. Glassdoor especially comes to mind because of how much user-generated content there is there. Employees and candidates are avid consumers of information about what's going on within an organization, what it's like to interview somewhere, how many people approve of their CEO, and how confident they are in leadership. Just trying to gather some additional third-party commentary around your candidate experience is definitely a good idea. But then also we were just talking about benchmarking yourself as well. That's something that the Candidate Experience Awards provides to its participants. Regardless of whether you win or not, you also get access to the full benchmark report that gives you an idea of how you stack up against the rest of the world in terms of candidate experience. So again, not just measuring for the sake of measuring, not reporting just within your function, but expanding your view to bring in a broader scope of data. That's going to help you to make some more, to gather some more actionable insights instead of just some aha moments.
And from my side, as I mentioned, there are definitely some metrics from a reporting standpoint that you can take a look at. Obviously, the web metrics of the click-through rates, the apply completion rates, the bottleneck pieces of it. As we've mentioned, those areas actually track when people drop out of your process. And so if you find out where people are dropping and you physically go in and take a look, then you can actually have some data that backs up some of that anecdotal pieces of it. So we definitely suggest tracking all of those web metrics and backing that up with the anecdotal data.
Perfect. Okay, so I'm definitely going to get to this last question from Molly. How do you suggest a startup or a new company begin focusing on analytics when it's never been done before? How do we get started with no past reliable data? Kyle, you want to start?
That's a really good one. Yeah, I think a great place to start is by asking your existing solution providers, whether it's your ATS, whether it's your job posting vendors, whether it's even your background check providers. All of these people are running analytics themselves. And quite a few are making investments in building benchmark capabilities. So ask your providers to give you some benchmark data for like organizations, whether it's an organization that's in the same industry or whether it's other startups in your region, whatever the qualifier is for that like other. Just go to them, use other people's data, and then start measuring from this point now, starting while you're thinking about it and while you're feeling motivated, rather than setting it for another day.
I definitely agree with that, and I would say that's a critical question because as I was saying earlier, there's never a better time to think about analytics than when you start and when you're setting up all of these systems. You may not have the data, but that's where you start asking the questions of where do we want to be, what do we want to measure ourselves by, and then you work yourself backwards and figure out what metrics do you want to track on a day-to-day basis. And absolutely, working with each vendor, they've done that already. They probably have a list of critical metrics that you want to try to track and then give you even advice on how you want to piece that data together to provide a consolidated view. So definitely reach out to those vendors, but spend that time up front definitely understanding where you want to go.
Great. So because we are a little bit over time, Kyle, did you want to go through the summary slide that we have, and then we'll... we'll end.
Yeah, I can just quickly close out with the takeaways here. Again, I want you guys to think about your KPIs as more than just metrics. We're in a highly competitive hiring climate, and there's no sign of that competitiveness waning. Your KPIs are business drivers, and they should be treated with the seriousness that business drivers have. But then also, I know there was a lot of doom and gloom in the research that I shared today, but the sorry state of analytics here, it presents an excellent opportunity for you to improve as well as to stand out. But in order to do that, I recommend not going it alone. You're not on your own here. I think that meaningful measurement practices are rooted in technology, but then also, and probably most importantly, start with the measures that matter to your organization, whatever they are.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Kyle, and thank you very much, Robert, and of course, everyone who was able to join us today. Thank you very much. We all know that recruiters are some of the busiest people in our office. I know I can say that for sure about Jobvite recruiters. So thank you for your time. Hope you all have a wonderful day. Bye.